true. Let's stop right now. Okay, this is our last meeting, and it's a slightly truncated meeting because it has something to do with how Esalen works and how there's a buffet slightly early on Sunday, and I've never quite understood it. But anyway, we'll stop roughly around 11:30. And they like you to have your baggage ready to move out by noon, because there's yet another wave of knowledge seekers on the way down Highway 1, even as we speak. So we need to clean up any unfinished business. We didn't really have much of a Q&A last night. We don't have to spend much time on that if nobody's interested. But if we are going to have talk about that, let's concentrate it now at the beginning of the thing. Yeah.
You know, I'd like to learn how to navigate the internet while I sleep and search databases for keywords. I have internet access, but not enough knowledge to do that. Is there a way to learn to do that in the way that
you're
speaking?
Yeah, it's a piece of programming that Stanford is giving away. And if you'll write me on the well, I'll email it to you. I'm on the well at hce@well.com. And if you want to communicate with me and you have email, I prefer email to other forms of communication because it's easy and quick. Yeah.
Yesterday you started talking about, or you said that there would also be something you say on the condensation or the change of time. We talked more about novelty, but I didn't really get the time part. Is that coming up still?
Well, what we didn't really talk about last night is the nature of this culminating event, which is now within the humanly cognizable domain of history. And we can talk about it different ways. Religions have always had, or Western religions have always had this intuition. So you can look at revelations, the various apocrypha and pseudepigrapha of the New and Old Testament, and aren't those wonderful words, by the way, apocrypha and pseudepigrapha? And there you have all this Jewish and Hellenistic speculation on the end of the world and how it will be. I consider that stuff raw material for a kind of Jungian deconstruction to try and figure out what are the consistent intuitions about the time beyond history. You know, the emperor, or not the emperor Julian, the patristic father Justinian taught that the resurrection body would be spherical. And this just brought delight to the heathen controversialists who were attacking him. I mean, they couldn't believe anybody could be that punchy in the head. But he maintained this to his death. Jung talks a lot about the rotundum, the round thing in the psyche. It's an image of the soul. It's also an image of the flying saucer. One of the sort of little pluses that I get off my view of the world is I get a free explanation for UFOs. UFOs are condensed reflections of the transcendental object at the end of time. They haunt linear time like ghosts. The way I think of the transcendental object at the end of time is like, you know, those mirrored balls that are in clubs that spin and throw the light around on the wall. Well, that's what this transcendental hyperdimensional object is like. As you get closer and closer to it, you can't see it because there are so many ricocheting reflections of the past and the future. The flying saucer is a three-dimensional, smeared-out version of the collectivity of the human soul beyond history. It is, in a sense, a prophecy. And so all these wild-eyed people running around with these rather aesthetically hobbled versions of what's going on involving flying saucers and friendly extraterrestrials and this and that. These are just distorted takes, if you will, or sections of something very, very hard to understand. But, I want to reiterate this point because I think it's a strong argument in favor of such a radically different idea. It's that our presence on this planet is part of this event. We are the outer edge of this condensation. Our cities, our art, our dreams, our whole extra-physical shtick is part of this event, which in a sense you could say the whole universe is this event. It's just that, yes, but the interesting part is concentrated at this one end of the temporal flow, not the distant past, the nearby future, where this spin-down wraparound thing occurs. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand or trying to picture what could happen in 2012 that would fulfill the wave without the equivalent of the descent from on high of Almighty God. And it's not easy. However, there are different places to stand in the data field. I think I mentioned this to some people last night after the official thing was over. One idea that's occurred to me, and I can feel it as a rising theme in my own life and in the fantasy of the culture, is time travel. If time travel were to be discovered or invented or proven as a concept, it would explain the concept of the end of history. Because history is the serial succession of fixed moments of experience in time. If you had a vehicle or a mantra or a drug that would take you to 1943 and 1622 and 3555 AD, the concept of history is meaningless. What you have then is a higher dimensional eschatonic plenum of time, where people, tell you, when they tell you their address, they not only tell you where they live, they tell you when they live. And so the concept of history is meaningless. I don't know if any of you saw, but in as sober and constipated a source of male domination as the Scientific American, two issues back, had a long issue on time travel, on the grandfather paradox, which we have discussed many times in this room. And here's why time travel might not be what it at first appears to be. At first it looks like it's liberation into the vastness of planetary eternity. I'll go live on an island off the coast of Pangaea in the late Cretaceous. You can sail forward unto the consummation of the world, so forth and so on, except for this thing called the grandfather paradox. And this is that if you could travel backward in time, you could conceivably murder your grandfather. And if you did this, you wouldn't exist. And therefore, some kind of paradox enters in here, which seems to imply that you can't travel, at least not backward in time. But I've begun to entertain the idea that what we call time travel that's a very primate-oriented notion toward what physicists would call the collapse of the state vector. What really is going to happen if you get hold of this principle is that the rest of the future will happen instantly. And that's very much like what we were talking about this universe that is half done only 1 second before its conclusion. I think what's going on is that we are an instrument of closure with this transcendental object. and that mind can force the rest of the history of the universe to happen instantly if it can reach through to a certain hyperdimensional switch, so-called, that's waiting to be pulled, and that the nature of the attractor and the human drama of fall and redemption and all this weird stuff that ricochets in our archetypal dreams and our religions and stuff about how there was a state of perfection and then there was a symmetry break and then there was guilt and this and that and some kind of limited constriction into a world of limitation and death and striving, and then history, some attempt to rebuild something dimly sensed but lost, and then, the rediscovery of the psychedelic experience and the acceleration of technology and the mirroring of the human soul in the surface of the machine, and then, faster, 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 and a kind of leap into an abyss of expectation and completion where everything flows together. That's what boundary dissolution means. Boundary dissolution in its most radical form means that the living and the dead, the organic and the inorganic, the past and the future, the possible, the probable, and the accomplished all fuse together in some kind of holographic fractal plenum that obliterates the concept of dimensionality, limitation, so forth and so on. And I not only think it's near, there have been people on street corners for millennia saying it's near. I have the coin of the realm to prove it's near. I have a mathematical equation and an argument from historical evidence and an invitation to rational critics to come and relate to it and so forth and so on. So it's a strange thing, my rap. It's a nutso revelation that seeks to make its case in terms of the soberest game on the block, which is the austere and august enterprise of mathematical formalism and science. And when I approach all this with a great sense of detachment and humor, years ago, 25 years ago, whenever it was that I got into this, I just assumed that, it was all revealed to me in the jungle. And I just assumed that getting straightened out was simply a matter of walking out of the jungle and finding experts, and that they would help me overcome this delusion. It's not been so easy. I came out of the jungle, I knew nothing about epistemology, the philosophy of science, the nature of the rules of evidence, what the relationship of mathematical formalism to scientific truth was. I was not well educated, and so I set out to become a player and to learn the stuff you have to learn. And what I discovered, to my amazement, was waiting for me was not a wisdom-laden and established canon of knowledge that could gently point out my errors and turn me in the right direction. What I discovered was nobody has a clue as to what is going on. When you start reading the philosophy of science and people like Imre Lakatos and Karl Popper and Paul Feyerabend, and you just realize, what we peasants think of as enormous battlements of adamantine rooted in truth are just, the stuff German weasels wrote in order to advance their careers in some 19th century university environment, or some damn thing like that. Anyway, it's got nothing to do with truth, and nobody knows anything. The generous approach when you get into these syncretic scenes is to say, oh, the Buddhists have a piece of the action, and the Theosophists had their finger on something, and even the Catholics, and Kabbalism is good. And the mushroom says something completely different. It says, nobody knows anything. Not even close. Not even facing east yet. You know, you don't have a clue about how the universe is put together, what life is, what's going on. And that's why I am so stoked on direct experience and self-empowerment, because nobody knows what's going on. These gurus, the good ones, will just, you know, fleece you and leave you alone. The bad ones will really mess with you. And they don't know anything. Do you think we'd be in this mess if somebody knew something? We wouldn't have gotten this screwed up if anybody had had any real insight into our condition. So I think, you know, part of the archaic revival is just reaching toward the button called Western epistemology, science, philosophy, religion, and civilization, and hitting reset. You know, that's fine. They had 2,000 years to make their point and deliver us into utopia or the arms of Almighty God, or whatever the plan was. And instead, you know, what we've got is the Crips and the Bloods and the rest of it. So enough. And it's a radical call to respect the integrity of your own intelligence. You should decide what makes sense. You, based on your experience and your self-examination, should decide what makes sense. And if you need help, dead people are more trustworthy than living people. You know, if you have to have a guru, Plato, Kant, John the Divine, you know, but not, you know, Swami Contempo or Guru Garage Key. No. It makes no sense at all. We're all in it together. And the other thing is, you know, the mystery does not require your belief. If the mystery is real, you can hold any damn opinion you please about it, and it will still be the mystery. So it's not about looking for something to believe in. Nothing should be believed in. Nothing is so existentially compelling that it compels belief. It's much better to simply, you know, take a kind of an "is that so" attitude toward what's going on and let it all slide past. Don't cling. The universe is an endless phantasmagoria of phenomena, and meaning is an iridescence, a fiction in the primate mind. The important thing is to affirm experience, and the moment-to-moment quality of immediate experience is what you will look back on at the moment of death and decide whether your life made sense or not. And these psychedelics are, you know, volume controls on the richness of felt and immediate experience. That's the important thing. They bring you into this devalued moment called the now. And they bring you into the richness of this devalued piece of real estate called my mind, self, and imagination. And they show you that, you know, you should never have traveled away from this in order to become CEO or get a Mercedes or buy a Rembrandt. Because if you had just noticed where you were when you started out, you wouldn't have had to go anywhere in the first place. I mean, this is really the teaching of alchemy, that out of the moment, out of the dross of the existential moment, can be distilled affirmation, understanding, appreciation. Affirmation, understanding, appreciation. These are feeling-toned complexes which intersect in the body. That's the thing. Ultimately, what the psychedelics are is a way, I've said 10 times, they dissolve boundaries. The boundary that they dissolve that will be most immediately important to you is the boundary between heart and mind, between body and soul, because you discover, the intellect is a form of love, and love is a form of understanding. And the polarity between these things is simply a social fiction. I mean, you can get past that in the first 40 minutes of a decent experience. So really, I think what we're trying to do is shed our social clothing, the carapace, the armor of misconception, limitation, self-doubt, suspicion of others, all these things that have been dropped over us that impede our unfoldment. The revolution that we're trying to make begins everywhere, which doesn't mean that you're released from political responsibility. It means that your responsibility is twofold. It's to the quality of your own experience and what you feed back into the world based on that, and, a simple political obligation to make sense to those who suffer, because there's suffering all over the place. And the horrifying thing about our circumstance is that those who could ameliorate the suffering are the furthest from it, the least likely to feel its impact. I mean, we're not ruled by people who live under bridges. We're ruled by people in chauffeured limousines. And so this is why there is a toleration of this kind of emotional discontinuity. One of the things psychedelics are about is feeling. And if we could feel our predicament as a human family, we would stop doing many of the things that we're doing. It's only an act of incredible denial that allows us to tolerate the kind of atrocities that we see on CNN and so forth, and the kind of idiot governments that we've put in place to deal with these things. I mean, we are led by the least among us. We are led by, the conniving, the venal, the fat-assed, the rapacious, the stupid. And that's why we have the quality of mass experience that we have. And, democracy is, I think, not so much a form of government as a style of biological organization. All other styles of government spring from theories that are very tormented. Whether you have a king or a commissar, some tormented theory lies behind this. But democracy is simply biology. Democracy is everybody pulling their own weight. And I think the forward stride into the defining of human freedom took its last great steps forward under American inspiration. That Jefferson and those people actually were onto something. But what we have now has nothing to do with it. I mean, this is as much Jeffersonian democracy as Jimmy Swaggart is Jesus Christ. What we have is a mediocrity, not mediocre, but media-driven. I mean, the idea that we hold fair elections in an atmosphere of such intense propaganda and hypola that Joseph Goebbels would eat his heart out if he could be here. So, the presupposition of democracy is an educated citizenry. And we all have, certain answers to be given in this area. We should not tolerate cultural amnesia. We should not tolerate the cult of the utterly new because it's shallow and it carries no depth. I mean, there has been deep thinking done by people in Western civilization, but it's been largely compromised and betrayed over the last 300 years, and over the last 50 years, it's been made a mockery. I mean, I don't see any difference between the society we're living in and the society that George Orwell described in 1984. And you remember atop the Bureau of History was the great blinking sign that said, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. I mean, I'm surprised they don't put this on the masthead of the New York Times. It's a little gentler, you know. It's not the gray world of Central European fascism. It's the go-go beige fascism of Malibu trend setting and flogging people into conformity, using advertisements, body anxiety, social anxiety, race anxiety to push you to spend money. Recently, a magazine approached me and said, we're doing a special issue on the apocalypse or something, and would you write a little thing about what people should do before the end of history? And I thought about it, and all I could come up with was a list of negatives. I realized that there is this desire to politically act. I mean, I come out of the Berkeley Commune and all that. I understand this impulse, but also, having come out of the Berkeley Commune and all that, I know how easily it can be perverted and tweaked and misguided. I think that there are a whole lot of things not to be done. I think I mentioned this earlier. Not to consume, not to watch. Voyeurism is the sadomasochistic virus of the age. It's why people watch TV. It's why they are able to distance themselves from their emotions. Voyeurism is a subtle sin of the age. Not to consume, not to believe. These ideologies, all of them, you know, from you know, Clinton liberalism to David Koresh and back again. Don't believe this stuff. I mean, this is all shoddy intellectual goods. Not to follow. There is nobody to follow. The people who aspire to lead should be caged and taken away in shackles. That should be how we identify the people who should be caged and taken away in shackles. Those who step forward to lead us are such squirrels that they should be immediately quarantined. So this is it. It's a retraction from the myths and idols of the tribe. Get with your body, your mind, your lover, your friends, and then, you know, not consume, not follow, not believe, not watch. In other words, don't participate in vicarious eroticism or violence. Eroticism, who cares? But violence, that's really nutty. I mean, how we've let that get out of control. How, you know, a lesbian kiss on TV generates 8 weeks of controversy and 50 million words, but watching people blown apart by automatic weapons hour after hour on all channels is thought to be quite an ordinary undertaking for a civilization. I mean, give me a break. It's just, it's ridiculous how far we've let all this spiral out of control, because we have bought the line sent down from the top that we are powerless, that we're atoms in some great social plan that the Pentagon and the World Bank and the UN, and they understand. This is nonsense. Nobody understands. I mean, because of my position as a writer and a somewhat trendy figure in the media, I occasionally get invited into the so-called corridors of power, not the real corridors of power, but like the Hollywood corridors of power, the science corridors of power. McKennas Law, no matter where you go, the average density of idiots remains the same. McKenna's second law, rather high. Rather high. It's the strangest thing. People aren't smarter around those polished boardrooms in those glass boxes in New York. They're frightened people, people trying to save their career, people going to their shrinks 3 times a week, people who are just, you know, barely hanging on by their fingernails. And I'm sure when you get up into the realm of government, it must be exactly the same way. And when you finally are sitting around the table deciding what to do with the nuclear arms of the Ukraine, probably people have to excuse themselves to call their mistress and call their connection and all the rest of it. Morons. Morons. The idea that somehow we could put in place a system that would advance wisdom was completely false. That's why democracy is such a deep insight. The people know better. The people know much better. I would almost push it into anarchy. I mean, I'm now 47, but when I was 23, I was easily convinced that if you come upon a group of people, say 1,000 people, destroying something, what grounds do you have not to join them? You know, do you have some deep inner wisdom? The people understand. And that's why the game of history has always been to suppress, repress, silence, divide, and twist the intentions of the people. And if we believe in the Gaian overmind, or the collective unconscious, or the will of the planet, or God Almighty for that matter, then obviously the instrument of God's will is not representative government. The instrument of God's will is the people. Rousseau talked about this. He called it the general will. He said it's a mystical doctrine. He said at any one time in history, a majority of the people can go against the general will, and they should be resisted. In other words, the dead count in this general will thing. It's not just the living who get to vote. There's also the morphogenetic momentum of the past. So I believe that psychedelics are a catalyst for the imagination, for cognitive activities, for thought, for analytical understanding, for loving absorption, for all forms of relating to the data of the world, and that it's an opening of your eyes, your heart, your mind, your soul, and that this is what needs to happen. And to the degree that it happens, we will distinguish ourselves. I mean, we're in real trouble here. We're basically in quicksand to our waist, and there's no sign of help on the way. And yet, it's not an inevitable thing. We have tools, there are people, there are ideas, there are plants that could save us. But it's not certain that they will save us. That's what compounds the tragedy. If the enterprise of intelligence and civilization is betrayed into extinction, it won't be because it was inevitably a bad idea. It will be because we blew it and destroyed what might have been something wonderful. We have within ourselves a demonic capacity to oppress each other, to define each other by categories of race, sex, age, so forth. And we have, an angelic capacity as well. Thomas Hobbes, one of the great paranoids of Western civilization, said, "Man to man is like unto an errant beast, and man to man is like unto a god." And this is, our dilemma. And it's a dilemma of consciousness. And, sitting here, suppose I'm preaching to the converted. I mean, you represent probably the 0.5% of concerned, striving, comfortable people on the planet. I mean, there are many people almost like you, but they wouldn't be here. But what this is all about is everybody. The average person on this planet is 22, black and female, and has 2 children. That's who the human race is today. And we, this upper 3% of the intelligentsia of the high-tech industrial democracies, are the people who will be asked, how did you manage it? Where did you steer it? You know, did you maximize your goals? And I think all of us misconstrue the level of our own power. I mean, I certainly feel that about my own career. I've been saying the kinds of things I'm saying now for 25 years in some form or another. And the mere act of repetition has changed me from an object of pity by my friends into a slice of the cultural dialogue. And there was nothing special about it. It's just persistence. So, you know, figure out what you want to do and where you want to make an impact. And then reclaim your body and your senses and your mind and your values. And it's not so scary, actually. It's not so scary. And then I think encourage other people to do likewise. We have a living presence among us to stabilize our faith that this is the right thing to do. And the living presence among us are the psychedelic plants. No other spiritual conviction in history could call its core concern into its presence so easily, so dependably. We have prayer which works. We have a ritual which works. We have a God which is alive on the altar. It's not a symbol. It's not a memory. It's not a prophecy. It's here. And, you know, to find this out is to take a step in your intellectual growth and evolution. You can choose not to follow the implications. But I have then done my part in this deal, which was that you should hear it, that you should hear it. And then what you do with it, that's your business.
Prayer works towards what purpose?
Well, in the sense that we have a mystery that we can call upon that will arrive. I mean, I've prayed. It's dreary, hard on the knees. I've meditated. Honest Buddhists will confess that it's the most boring, god-awful thing there is. Psychedelics work. You know, that's the point. That's our ace. You know, these other styles are either incredibly difficult, requiring unbelievable discipline, or they don't work. Psychedelics work. They are the democratic path to Godhead. And what could Godhead be but democratic? Who wants to approach a mystery in the company of a bunch of beady-eyed guys in dhoties who haven't touched the flesh of a woman in 30 years and so forth? I mean, that's creepy. The main thing that I want to communicate with you, and I really, I don't know how much to talk about it, how personal to get. It's very weird to be the person that I am, you know?
Weird to be the person I am.
And weird to be the person that Kat is, and probably to some degree, vis-a-vis this issue, weird to be every person in this room, because there aren't many cultural mysteries. There aren't many things where you could talk to someone and open your heart, and they would take 4 steps back and say, you know, you're a very mixed up person, and I don't want to hear any more about this from you. And yet, you know, here this is. I don't know to what degree. We don't know what we're dealing with. That's the thing. I mean, you can think of Kat and I as Marie and Pierre Curie. In fact, a friend of mine said this. He said, yes, you shouldn't make that metaphor. They both died of radium poisoning. But we don't know. You know, for thousands of years, electricity was what you saw if you rubbed an amber rod across a cat's skin in a darkened room in dry weather. and then you would see an electrical discharge through the fur of the cat. That was electricity from Herodotus to Leiden, essentially, 2,000 years. And then someone in a very short time figured out that you could light cities, smelt metal, transmit information, all of these things. And this is how I feel about the psychedelic experience. I have never seen such energy, release of energy on such a massive scale that if it could be channeled, if this information, these images, I mean, you see more art in 20 minutes on a psychedelic flash than the human species has produced in 15,000 years. One person. Well, what could possibly be the implication of that, and how could that be possible, and yet we cannot get it out? Is it that reality is simply the palest, palest, palest reflection of what would be possible if we as primates could open that channel and get it out? You know, it's a cliche to say you only use 5% of your brain, but that's what it must mean, that if you used 100% of your brain, you would exist in these realms that we can barely cognize. One of the things I will talk about tomorrow briefly is the Maya, who I think attained some kind of extraordinary techno-pharmacological breakthrough that we can barely even suggest to ourselves linguistically. It is so far off the beaten path of what we have achieved. They achieved some kind of understanding of time through the use of psychedelics that allowed them to choreograph the birth, rise, and death of their civilization the way you would choreograph a dance. They had, you know, a sense of the Tao much in excess of anything we even inherit from the Chinese tradition. They basically saw their entire cultural expression over 1,000 years was seen by each individual totally during their own lifetime. And this is still happening in the Yucatan and Chiapas. They live now in the light of the fact that it's over. They are tugging on their overcoats and looking to see what they dropped by their seat as they begin to leave the theater. But they all have the sense of this phenomenal cultural unfolding that was controlled at every point and came and flowered and went away. And this is the kind of grace, a kind of atemporal understanding of how to be that I think the psychedelic experience imparts to societies, in some cases through their shaman, in other cases because the whole society is generally immersed in that notion. Why is it so state-bounded? Why can you not bring these things out? I don't have the answer. I think it's a very interesting question because I think essentially what I'm going to say tomorrow morning, which is that hallucinogens are the catalyst for the evolution of human consciousness, means that these images, which we all see so much of, human history is a psychedelic trip. It is the collective effort to realize these images, first as one cultural expression, you know, Egypt, Babylon, Vedic India, the Maya, the Inca, the Eskimo, the Altai, the Ainu, the Witoto. These are efforts to articulate the ever-present invisible surround, and yet they're all terribly, terribly inadequate. This is what I always thought about rock and roll after taking psychedelics, would say, it's so bad, rock and roll. It has so far to come. Why can't it come forward faster? Why can't it be as good as you know it could be? Why can't art be as good as we know it could be? If these things are in our heads, we need to get them out, because I'm Platonist enough to believe that, you know, the good, the true, and the beautiful are the same thing. So if you see something which is beautiful, bringing it into the world cannot fail to be good and true. And we have an immense reservoir of beauty present to hand, but we cannot seem to bring it out. It's very difficult to bring it forward, to contemplate it yourself, alone, without language, in the silence of your head. We have all in this room achieved that. We all have glimpsed the stone. We all have stared upon the burning bush, but none of us have been able to articulate it to each other to our own satisfaction. And this is what I mean about language. Language is what we are bootstrapping ourselves forward with. Language is the mediator of reality, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow. The world is not made of quarks or electrons or anything like that. The world is made of languages. And these languages have different modes of expression, but there is nothing more real than language. And language is a phenomenon happening within the cerebral cortex. So I have very little patience with explanations of what the world is that don't take account of the fact that all you ever deal with is your description, you know. So that, you know, it isn't physics, quantum or otherwise, that's going to give you an insight into how consciousness works. It's probably a field much more closely related to literary criticism that is going to give you a handle on life. Because you don't want to know what the lives of 10,000, what laws govern the rules of 10,000 people or 1,000,000 people. You want to know what rules govern your life. And if you look back through your life at your breakthroughs, your disappointments, your love affairs, your betrayals, you see that there is it all happened very oddly, hung together by coincidence, chance-met people, literary unlikelihoods that would never be tolerated in a good novel. It means that your life has a quality of artifice that no theory of being is addressing for you. Theories of being are saying, oh, scientific laws operate and they always operate the same. But what you want to know is, why is there this plotted, artificial quality to your own life? And this is a problem of language and of the direct analysis of experience. And I'm going to close this evening by saying the way that I want people to be liberated is to center themselves on their own experience and realize that the primacy of experience is uncontestable. No ideology can erode a fact of experience. Nobody telling you how things should be sufficient reason for you to set aside a fact of experience. The way we leave history and enter the future is by centering ourselves on ourselves and ceasing to participate in these mythological structures which are handed down from above. And I think the extraterrestrial thing comes very close to this, because everybody wants there to be extraterrestrials, but everyone wants Time magazine and CBS News to disseminate it to us down through the hierarchy of cultural validation so that we can all be sure it's real. And actually it can't happen that way. Cultures don't contact extraterrestrials. Individuals do. And if your validation of being is to confirm the non-human other, which surprisingly it is true for many people that this is important, then the way to do it is to look within. And for centuries this has been called having a relationship with God or Christ or something. Now these kind of control languages seem to carry a lot of unpleasant freight along. So without judging what it is, you just say, you know, you want to validate the experience of the other for yourself. And the discovery of the other as a valid fact in being has the peculiar quality of validating the self. It's as though the validated presence of the other confirms that there is something which perceives the other, which is the self. And it's that reciprocal feedback between the other and the self that creates super democratic, super realized, non-neurotic psychedelic individuals. And this is what we're doing here. This is what I hope to put across in this weekend.